The spotlight on Bear. We do our spotlights here, season spotlights. Put out a tweet here. I gave my take on a contract as well because I think that's going to be a big part of this discussion here moving forward. The season that Ethan Bear has had. So let's put the spotlight on Ethan Bear. Look at this graphic. I tell you, whoever built this, they're overdue for a raise. I think personally. Ethan Bear. Let's get to it. 56 games played, 3 goals, 13 assists, 72 shots on net, and expected goals for control of 52%. That means that 52% of expected goals are happening for his team when he's on the ice, and his average ice time has been 18:23 this season. Quads, your thoughts on Ethan Bear, the addition to the Vancouver Canucks that they traded, what was it, a 5th-round pick? A 5th-round pick for Ethan Bear to get him back. Very nice return, obviously. He's played games for the Canucks. I think you can do that. I would do that trade again 100 times. But what are your thoughts on his season so far and maybe where we go from here? Because this is an RFA who's going to need a contract this summer. So there's a lot to talk about here with the future of Ethan Bear.
He is a player that's been a subject of conversation a lot lately. And the reason I want to talk about him today, Chris, is just we saw The Athletic kind of put out their player cards or whatever, where they show the market value of how a player is playing, fueled by analytics by Shayna Goldman and Dom Luszczyszyn. Wow, that was tough. Over at The Athletic. And they had Ethan Bear as a $6+ million player. Now, the thing is that's not suggesting that he should be paid like that. And that's what a lot of people take it as, is they're like, whoa, that's so stupid. Analytics are broken. Ethan Bear shouldn't get 6.8 million or whatever it was. It's just saying that his underlying data shows you that he is performing at an above average level. Now, with that in mind, there is still a lot that goes into play. This is a guy who wasn't cracking the Carolina Hurricanes lineup. So with that in mind, Chris, the question becomes, what's the right contract for Ethan Bear? Because I don't think anybody would deny that he's been a good defenseman for the Canucks, that he's played in a top 4 role on this team and he's done fine. He's done admirably well. But I think long term, you have to think, what is Ethan Bear to this team, right? Because if you're trying to improve and if you're trying to make this team into a playoff team, like, Ethan Bear probably isn't a top 4 defenseman, right? And it's not the same as Luke Schenn, where we're talking about a guy who played with Quinn Hughes, looked great, and that's kind of where the conversation begins and ends. I don't think it's that, like, it's not at that level. Like, Ethan Bear's a better defenseman than Luke Schenn, but what I'm trying to illustrate is just that, some people, if you're thinking of anything like 3+ million, I'd say that's too high, because you're paying for, in my mind, you're paying for a third pairing defenseman who on a good team is a third pairing defenseman who can play in your top 4 if needed, right? And I just don't think the Canucks should be cornering the market on that, right? Like, he's not as bad as Tucker Poolman, but have we learned nothing from Tucker Poolman? The $2.5 million cap hit that was handed out to Tucker Poolman, like, the Canucks paid big time for a third pairing defenseman, and I don't know if it's the best allocation of salary cap for this team, right? Who is already pretty cap strapped. Now, anything can change in the offseason, buyouts, all that sort of stuff. I would just be a little bit gun shy to dish out anything above 2.5 to Ethan Bear on like a 3-year deal. I would definitely be I would pump the brakes a little bit on anything above 2.5 for 3 years. I would say trying to get it under that if you can.
Yeah, I think the question for me, actually, I'll make this statement first, because I think the Vancouver Canucks 365 days ago needed to address what they have on the right side of their defense. They've done a very good job of improving the right side of their defense in the past year. You can say it. Listen, you can make the argument that what they gave up was a lot for Hronek. It was, but Hronek's going to be a good player. I think he's going to be a good right-handed defenseman for this team for a few years at least. Ethan Bear for a 5th-round pick, excellent. It's great. They've definitely improved the right side of their defense. My question, though, is with Ethan Bear, you need to decide if this is a top 4 guy or not on the next contract, and he needs to be paid like that. And the way that he's playing this past season with the Vancouver Canucks, he has been a top 4 guy. This season, earlier in the year, when he was playing for the Carolina Hurricanes, a good team, he was not a top 6 defenseman. He was healthy scratched. He was struggling to get into the lineup. So you need to make that decision, right? Like, teams that are bad have to overpay for good players. And I'm not saying even great players or, elite players. Just, Ethan Bear's pretty good. I think he's a good right shot defenseman. The Canucks don't want to be the bad team that's paying him $3 million a year, right? Like, you don't want to do that. And I know the cap's going to go up and there's going to be things that'll change, but I think a lot of people have argued in the chat here. This is an interesting topic because I think that's what people are looking at here. It's like, are you thinking Ethan Bear is going to play with Quinn Hughes for the next 2 years, 3 years? It's very possible. It's very possible that that's something we see. They seem to work pretty well when it comes to moving the puck, and defending hasn't been a huge issue for these two guys. But if you put some money into Ethan Bear, and let's say it's like, I thought a contract that makes sense because I don't know if he's a top 4 guy for the Vancouver Canucks when they actually start to get towards being a playoff team. So I said 3 years, $2.25 million per. I think you're acceptable. You can take that as acceptable because if he isn't in your top 4, at least you're paying him, like you said, under 2.5 to be a bottom pairing guy, if that's where he lands. He's also a guy that I think if he's playing on your bottom pair and in a pinch, you need a top 4 guy. Like, having a guy at 2.5, 2.25, that's an okay spot there. But I know Harms made this argument a lot on the show of like, you can't, the bottom pairing guys need to be making like 900K. And you can find guys that I don't know if they're at the level of Ethan Bear with how effective he's been as a Vancouver Canuck, but you can find a guy who can be a bottom pairing guy and effective for you at $1 million. You just have to do a good job in free agency, right? So it's difficult. I would hope that the contract is under 2.5 if it's a 2 to 3 year deal. But I see Corey Anderson in the chat says no way he takes 2.25. I had somebody reach out today. They saw my tweet when I said 2.25, and they said that is not happening. If you look at the minutes that he's played this year for Vancouver, he is going to ask for a lot more than 2.25. So that's the difficult thing. It's, do you want to, like, can you even risk going at $3 million for Ethan Bear? Can you risk going for him 3.5 for like a 2-year deal and him not working out? Because it's very difficult. It's obviously the biggest position of need around the NHL, so you have to pay a little bit of a premium there. I get that. I just don't know if you want to go into the threes. Like, I'd start to get a little worried if you're going into the threes, especially if it's a 2 to 3 year deal. And the thing that I was told today by that person that reached out, they said, like, you're buying UFA years here, and that makes a difference on the next contract. Yes, he's an RFA this season, but you're buying into RFA years after that, or sorry, UFA years after that. That's valuable. That's valuable because if Ethan Bear were to hit free agency, he'd get more than 2.25 from a team, whether it be the freaking Arizona Coyotes looking for their top pairing guy, or some team looking to secure up their top 4 who could potentially use him in a bottom pairing role. Somebody's going to pay him more than 2.25. So I think if the Canucks get this deal done under 2.5, 2.75, I'd be okay and happy with that. If it's under 2.5, I'd be like, yeah, that's good. I'm good with that. But the person that reached out to me today said I was crazy for thinking that it could be near 2.25. You can guess who that person is. They talk to agents a lot.
I was just gonna say I could absolutely guess. There was a few spelling mistakes
Everybody
in the
could.
text.
Yeah.
Okay.
A lot of
Okay.
on the enter button.
Okay, enough here. Okay, Ethan Bear, let's get back on the rails. I can't stop laughing about anyways, we're not gonna keep going.
Sure.
Ethan Bear.
Well, let's
Okay.
I do have this graphic here. Let's pull this up. Let's just I'll let you react to it. But these are the pairing his partners that he's had throughout the season. These are who Bear has played with throughout the season. I did leave the Corsi up there and the expected goals up with. So you can see his most consistent partner has been Quinn Hughes this season. He's played 381 minutes of 5-on-5 with Quinn Hughes. They've held on to a 53.5% Corsi. The expected goals for, interesting here, actually below 50% when playing with Quinn Hughes. So we've seen him play with a lot of different bodies, right? Like over 50 minutes with Jack Rathbone, over 50 minutes with Burrows, Stillman, Myers, Ekman Larson, over 240 minutes. Lots going on there. So he's been able to play with different guys, but you look at some of the numbers, he's been horrible with Tyler Myers. He's been horrible with Riley Stillman, but that's not a shocker. We talked nothing about Stillman on this show. Wasn't good with Luke Shen, has not been good with Brisebois. Looks pretty good with Wolanin, so maybe you're looking at a third pairing like that, something to try, but they only played 13 minutes together this season. So I don't know. There's certainly some options here. We actually think that just from looking at some of the Corsi numbers, like him and Jack Rathbone have been pretty good so far. Or sorry, I'm missing the number here. They have not been good. It's not been a lot of great production here from Ethan Bear when he's not playing with Quinn Hughes. So that makes it a little difficult because if he is going to be used in a bottom pairing role, what does that bottom pairing look like? And maybe the matchups become a little bit easier. I just think there's a lot to get into with Ethan Bear here about how it's almost like, to me, it's like if he's playing with Quinn Hughes for the next 2 years and you know that for sure, he's absolutely worth $2.5 million or more. If he's not playing with Quinn Hughes full time over the next 2 years, he's not worth more than 2.5 million in my books.
Well, hang on a sec, because the argument, just to play devil's advocate, because I agree with you about the price tag there. But the argument here, see that name at the bottom, and for those on the podcast, the name Philip Hronek. He's played well. He played well with Hronek in 13 minutes and 37 seconds of ice time, exact same amount he had with Christian Wolanin. So I think at the end of the day, Chris, all this argument comes down to is this guy going to be Quinn Hughes' partner for the next 2 years or 3 years, whatever? Is this guy going to be a top 4 defenseman for your team over the next 2 or 3 years? And if this team is able to shed Tyler Myers' salary this offseason, right? We've talked numerous times about how that's a pretty movable contract. You would think there's a spot in the top 4 for Ethan Bear to play. So look, if you're paying him to be a third pairing guy, yeah, 2.5 is too much. If you're paying him to be a top 4 defenseman, which based on what we saw when Hronek was in the lineup and Bear was lined up as his partner, you're probably looking at Ethan Bear as a top 4 defenseman on your team next year. So then you become okay with maybe 2.75 or 3 million on a 2 or 3 year deal. I still don't love it, but they're going to qualify him. He's got arbitration rights, so we know how much time on ice affects arbitration. So
Big time.
Exactly. And look, like I think at the end of the day, what it comes down to is this team's trying to compete. And if they weren't trying to compete, I don't think it's nearly as much of a topic of conversation, but this team's trying to make the playoffs next year. And based on the other options that are available to them, I'm not sure if they're able to find anything better than Ethan Bear. And if they're really in any position to start taking chances where they go out and get guys that they don't know are going to work in their system. We've heard Tocchet speak a lot about how much he likes Ethan Bear, and we've seen it. We've seen how it's worked out since Tocchet's come aboard. Look, I think at the end of the day, the Canucks are going to get this done. I think it's going to be in that 3 million range, to be honest with you. I just think it's a little bit high.
Yeah, you bring up a good point of he can play with Philip Hronek. He could be an answer there. It's just, yeah, like I would bet right now, and a lot can change obviously between now and opening night of next season. But would you agree with me that I would bet that Bear is in the top 4 on opening night?
Yeah.
Or do you think they change it up? Yeah, I think it's what we'll see to start the season. And listen, when you're building your roster in the off season, you're not building as much. I mean, in the back of your mind you are, but like you're building for opening night, right? Like you're building for opening night and hoping that not a bunch of horrible injuries happen. So if you're building for opening night and Bear is in your top 4, like you probably feel pretty comfortable paying $3 million for any top 4 defenseman if you're using them in your top 4, right? 3 million I feel like is like what you pay for a top 4 guy minimum, right? Like minimum. So if you're getting him at $3 million, yeah, it'll be interesting to see. And I think you brought up a very good point of like he can play with Hronek too, and maybe that's a little bit of an answer there if they have some success together. You just, it's going to be very difficult to see what happens in this offseason negotiation. Like I said, the person that reached out very much wanted to make a big point of you're buying UFA years, and that is costly for a player who's in Bear's age. But at the same time, like the argument that I made against that was like, okay, but Bear wasn't playing earlier in the season until he got onto this bad team, this team that's bottom 10 in the NHL. So yeah, there's a lot to happen here, and I think we'll have a very long discussion once the deal actually comes down here, because he needs one. He needs a contract this summer to be on the ice next year for opening night. So we'll see what happens with Ethan Bear.